the public hearing of the Public Ordinance Committee, Monday, September 25th, 2017. The first speaker tonight is the Honorable Joe Gresko.
Ready? Joe Gresko, 284 Mary Avenue. I'm here in favor of the ordinance prohibiting waste associated with natural gas and oil extraction. It seems this fracking waste from Pennsylvania and the greater area there is looking for a new home, and I prefer if it wasn't Stratford. In 2014, I assisted Stratford's #1 friend of the environment, State Rep Terry Backer, in crafting a 3-year moratorium on fracking waste and requiring DEEP to subsequently construct regulations, which we are still waiting for. Well, 3 years later, this session, the House of Representatives passed a statewide fracking waste ban bill, HB 6329, which I co-sponsored, but that legislation did not make it through the Senate. That bill would have allowed fracking waste into the state, but strictly for research purposes, as to possibly detoxify the waste, nothing more. I'm sure the bill will be reintroduced in the 2018 session, and I will be co-sponsoring once again. Meanwhile, many municipalities are stepping up, including Stratford, saying they do not want this fracking waste within its borders, and I could not agree more. Ingredients such as heavy metals, chlorides, bromides, toxins, toluenes, and who knows what else that hasn't been disclosed. I do not want to see drinking water in Stratford or the state fouled by fracking waste, if for nothing but our health and safety, not to mention soil, air, etc. I believe a ban is a way to go, not another moratorium, in that it makes life easier for DEEP and our health department than have to worry about regulations and keeping them up to date, etc. The amount of drilling for natural gas is not on the same pace that it was because prices have come down, but if the demand increases, so will the fracking. If Stratford had similar bans and regulations in the past, we would not be in the Raymark/Avco situation we find ourselves today. Just keep that in the back of your minds. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Ms. Manis?
Can I ask a question of
Sure.
Representative Gresko? Hi. Question regarding fracking waste. I know with the Raymark waste that is gone, one of the things with the DEP and DEEP and EPA's argument is that it's got to go somewhere, right? The waste is going to go somewhere. So my question to you is, does Connecticut have plans to not accept fracked gas in the future? And could EPA put in some kind of a thing that if you accept it, you accept the waste too? Is that something that is being looked at?
Connecticut does accept frack gas at this moment, and depending on how things shake out with the whole Millstone situation, let's say, for example, that they do decide to close it in the not too distant future, the anticipated method of making up that power is by using natural gas. So you can't sort of have it both ways. If the EPA does come up with those regulations, we would deal with that when the time came. But while we have the opportunity, I think that it should be something that we take seriously as far as the ban goes.
Okay, I just have one follow-up question.
Yeah, we are
So-
having a presentation on the fracking.
That's okay. I just have one follow-up question because he knows what's happening with Millstone, and I couldn't remember the name. So we had a bill when Mayor Harkins was a legislator that didn't allow contamination to march through the streets. Like, it has to be okayed by the town. That has kind of stopped up and clogged what we have for our cleanup. Like, we have to go through some other channels because of that law. It's kind of been a gray area. So is putting this ban in place going to stop Millstone or going to stop any kind of opportunities that Connecticut would have for economy or anything like that? Would that all be negotiated? Do you see anything that we would kind of cut off, like we do something now that then down the line would put us in jeopardy of not receiving something.
I would think that Millstone, of all people, would be in favor of the fracking waste ban because their main opponents are the natural gas industry at this point as far as what they want to do in the near future. And as far as transporting the waste through, that's something that we have to deal with now, as we saw when we did, the Stratford did the first phase of this Raymar cap at Home Depot, and then many of the constraints that we have now. And the reason why this is going to take so long is because we have those regulations that need to be adhered to for the safety and health of the individuals that live around the property, so that you're not just digging this stuff up and it's going everywhere while you're taking it out.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair.
Mr. Chase was first, please.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you, Mr. Representative.
Ben, how are you?
I'm fine, how are you? Quick question. The bill that you mentioned would have allowed fracking material in the state for research purposes?
Yes.
Not to sound glib, but that sounds to me like a camel putting its nose under the tent. That's the first step. Easily changed down the road, knowing how the legislature works. Why not just put in a state ban instead of this?
It was one of the compromises that were agreed to as far as getting it through the House. There were a couple of firms up was one in Naugatuck, and there was one outside of Hartford, which escapes me at the moment, that have the technology and the wherewithal to take some of the fracking waste to see if it can be detoxified. In that case, it would be allowed, but not to be trucked in to be, landfilled or worse.
And how much waste are we talking about for research? A bucket? A truck?
Basically, enough to do the research, a bucket. I mean, I doubt it would be a truck, you wouldn't have to do that, but I guess the first point would be to try to identify exactly what's in it. I mean, we know some of the things that are in it, but there's also things that haven't been disclosed over time, and radioactivity being one of them. I forgot to even write in here, so I can't see that.
Okay.
in good conscience.
And lastly, has any legislation been introduced calling for an outright ban?
It will happen again in 2018, and I will probably end up co-sponsoring that bill. I'm sure Jen will be on me to make sure I do.
And not the other?
Not the
Other being
not the
the
moratorium.
research?
Well, that remains to be seen, because you know what it's like on the last day of session upstairs in the Senate when you're trying to cram everything on the consent calendar. So it just missed out. So we'll try again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr.
Greg.
Brown?
To Tina's point regarding interfering with the economic movement, the last paragraph of the proposed ordinance is transportation, and the sentence reads, "Nothing in this ordinance shall be interpreted to ban the transportation of any product or byproduct described on any roadway or real property within the town of Stratford." So the ordinance is focused on the processing of the waste or the storage of the waste, and it allows the transportation of waste through the town. That's it.
Correct, right. So if the waste, let's say Maine says, yeah, bring us your fracking waste and pay for it, and it's got to find its way up there, and it's going to go up 95, we can't say, oh, you can't bring it in the state. If it's going through, and hopefully the technology will be there to secure the truck or whatever it's transporting in, interstate commerce can't be restricted. But as far as a final resting place is what we're most concerned about, and I applaud the idea by the council.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Griswold. Next up is Gerald Gray.
Hi, I'm Gerald Gray of 29 Shoreline Drive here in Stratford. I'm coming here very spur of the moment, completely unprepared and uninformed on what I'm speaking to, but I saw the title of number 4 authorization to create a special revenue fund, open space and property acquisition fund. I don't know what the contents of it are, and so I'm not going to speak directly to it because I can't. However, it was the title that brought me here tonight because I have experience in the topic of property acquisition perpetrated by the town, and I know of multiple others, and it is a heavy subject for me and these people. I submitted testimony to the Connecticut legislature about a bill that greatly expanded the powers of municipalities in conducting municipal predation upon residents or property owners in their municipalities via tax liens, hoarding and blight liens, etc. With the constitutionality of these would be heavily in question. What we have in Stratford that I have spoken to the town council and been participating in repeatedly in going to various commission meetings like the redevelopment and economic development commission meetings, where I'm actually the only person of the public that's attending. Just attended two recently. They don't put my name down on the entry list of having attended. When they say others present, they very much omit my name from these. And when they allow me to speak, I do speak to the topic of what the redevelopment agency and Gail Nobley's self-defined blight project and Bruce Jackson and the town attorneys are doing to people in this town, which is perpetrating municipal predation with fabricated blight and hoarding liens and fines to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars. I can give one example of a neighbor of mine. He is an elderly person now. He is working. A neighbor of his didn't like him, put in a complaint about blight. The man, if you went and saw his property, he's got just, some steps that are in disrepair. It was nothing to do with authentic blight. And this town has put $48,000 worth of blight liens on his home and forced him into bankruptcy. And he stopped paying taxes at that point, so now he is in a foreclosure to the tune of $98,000. This is not right. This is why I'm here speaking to, when I see something about open space and property acquisition fund, I can only say that this is something that the mayor's office, the town attorneys, etc., are perpetrating against our residents and property owners, and it's horrible, it's reprehensible, and it's wrong. Thank you.
Was there anybody else who wished to speak from the public? Did you want to speak? Please. State your name and address, please.
My name is Jessica Wolf, and I live at 305 Goldback Drive. I also am not really prepared. However, I feel very strongly about fracking waste as a resident and someone who has done some reading about it, and I just feel that why do we want that in our town? We don't. It's dangerous, and the process of producing it is dangerous, and I just think we're well advised to stay away from it. If we can do it, let's stay away from it and think more about preserving the quality of life in the environment. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Well, that concludes the public hearing. Since we don't have a quorum here tonight, actually, but I had some people come in tonight to actually talk about some of their issues and some of these ordinances that we were going to work on. So since they're all here, I'd like to give them the opportunity to at least give us a little bit of an informal knowledge on what exactly these things are so that we know for next time whether we can push them straight through or not. So first up would be Jen Siskin, who's going to talk about the fracking waste issue. What's that? not saying informal, but you can't do it anyhow. The public meeting continues, yeah. Comments committee continues.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Siskind. I'm a volunteer with Food and Water Watch. I'm their Connecticut local coordinator. And I've been assisting towns across the state pass an ordinance to ban fracking waste. And the reason why I'm doing this is because the legislation that is passed at the state level, unfortunately, has been filled with loopholes. Our current moratorium only bans specific type of waste because of a very narrow definition of what that waste is. But the moratorium, or the ordinance in front of you to be considered at a later meeting date, would ban all drilling and extraction waste for both oil and gas. It's much more comprehensive than what the state currently has in their temporary moratorium, and also more comprehensive than the bill that moved forward this last legislative session. So we're hoping that next year we will get additional language at the state level, but it's not guaranteed. So this map is just showing you where all the waste is being disposed of in and around Pennsylvania, but they're producing so much they're having to ship it out to 8 different states. In a single year, Pennsylvania has produced up to 1.9 billion gallons of liquid waste and hundreds of thousands of gallons of solid waste. Now, our current moratorium is also a mandate that deep right regulations, so unless the legislature changes current state law, regulations will be moving forward, and there will be permits written for facilities that apply for them. And there's 3. One is right next to Stratford in Bridgeport, another in Meriden, and another in Bristol. And all this waste will be coming into Connecticut by tanker truck on I-84 and also possibly 95 and whatever would connect between 84 and 95. We do know how radioactive this waste is. The National Council on Radiation Protection has advised us that because they're now drilling horizontally through the shale formation, it's picking up a lot more radioactive material. And we're producing so much of this waste because this new horizontal drilling method, each well is injected with 4 to 5 million gallons of solution. And over 10,000 wells have already been drilled in Pennsylvania, and an estimated 80,000 will be drilled before this gas supply is exhausted. The National Council on Radiation also advises us on how this radiation can move through the air and impact the human body, how it can impact soil and both ground and surface water and impact the human body. And unfortunately, nobody is regulating this radioactive waste. The EPA, the NRC, and the FDA and states all have separate regulations for different types of radioactivity, but what's naturally occurring coming out of the ground is not regulated by any federal or and not by the state of Connecticut. And we know how radioactive this is because for decades scientists have been testing it. The Marcellus Shale is one of the most radioactive waste sites in the nation, or shale sites in the nation. And all these little shapes and colors are individual wells that have been tested, and you can see how high the radium contents are. And we know that this radium is a cause of breast, bone, and liver cancer and is associated with leukemia. And it stays radioactive for about 4,000 years, and as it decays, it turns into lead. So anywhere that this spills, it's going to be around for a very long time. And the costs to remediate are going to be huge if they can even be done. In addition to radioactivity, there's other naturally occurring toxins that are in the ground as well, and this is just a short list of some of them and their impacts to the human body. This study also shows which chemicals that were known in 2011 and how they can impact the body, whether they're soluble in water or whether they're volatile, meaning they can travel through the air and impact the human body that way. And there's been more than 750 medical studies that have been done to date on what's happening health-wise to people in areas where this waste is being stored, where it's being spilled, and where people are close to drilling sites. And we can anticipate these same physical conditions to occur if people are living close to storage sites that are venting emissions or where spills or leaks are occurring. And these are just several different types of waste. There's the solid waste that gets drilled out of the ground to create the well. There's the flow back of what they inject into the well. There's also a naturally occurring brine material that gets separated from the gas, and that is reused over and over again at different well sites. We know the records of these three facilities, Bristol, Meriden, and Bridgeport. The Bridgeport facility has had the worst compliance out of all three. Here's additional information. You can find this on Rivers Alliance website to get more information. And this is the potential chain of radioactive and chemical contamination that we're already seeing in other states. Almost all of these potential sources. We're already seeing accidents, leaks, and spills. We're already seeing runoff. We're seeing leaching into groundwater, impacting aquifers. When it's transferred in and out of tanker trucks and into storage or at hazardous waste treatment facilities, we're seeing spills. And these facilities are currently discharging their effluent into the sewage systems of the towns that they're in. So when the Bridgeport hazmat facility doesn't adequately clean what they're supposed to, they then discharge effluent into the city of Bridgeport, and that facility isn't equipped to clean up what it's not supposed to be receiving in the first place. And so that flows right through their system and goes into the sound. Sludge from the incinerators are periodically cleaned out and sent to the trash to energy incinerator. This is another source of possible radioactive air emissions because heat does not impact radioactivity. And also the state could license beneficial reuse. Unfortunately, the solids are being used to mix in with construction fill as base underneath roads, as brownfield capping, and the salts are also being used on roadways. The spraying of roads is the only thing that DEEP is authorized at their discretion, according to the current state law, to ban. It would take a change in state law to get them to ban anything else. They're required to move forward. And this is the difference in language between what's before you as a town and what the state has currently banned. Because there's a very narrow restriction of hydraulic fracturing waste and the process of hydraulic fracturing, what comes before the hydraulic fracturing, the drilling, which creates most of the solid waste, isn't included. And anything secondarily to hydraulic fracturing is kind of nebulously defined, but there's additional waste that's produced during the production phase, during the treatment of gas, during storage of gas, and no oil waste is included at all in the state language. So we're hoping that we can get this fully comprehensive language into the state bill, but we haven't been able to do that in 14 or 17. And it would require both caucuses to come to an agreement together. And last year, several of them had very definite starting points on where they were willing to negotiate on the language. This is what's happened in New York State. We've had individual towns pass their own bans and moratoria. And then 15 county legislatures have gotten involved and passed specific waste ban. And the language that's before you has passed in Clinton County and one other county. It was drafted by the Legal Counsel for Riverkeeper Organization, and it's considered the gold standard or the most comprehensive language for banning this waste. You can also see all 5 boroughs of New York City has banned. And this is where we are for Connecticut. I'm sorry, my formatting is changing a little bit on my computer here, but we're now up to 26 towns. My town, Glastonbury, passed last Tuesday, and Hartford the night before. And I have at least another 6 towns that are currently in the process. Next week I'll be in Milford talking to them. Greenwich has had a special committee working over the summer on this. Probably in October we'll see several more towns passing as well. We hope that you will take action, and after the election in November, we hope that your council will also consider a resolution to the state to ask them to pass the same language if you pass this before the election season. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Mr. Jason?
Couple of questions. You made reference to a state temporary moratorium. Can you go into more detail on that?
Sure, yeah. In 2014, there was a bill that was moving forward that would have been a ban. It had that narrow definition of the waste is only what comes from the hydraulic fracturing process, which is the one process where they're injecting all this chemical solution into the well, and they're doing it at such high pressure that it fractures the rock, and then it releases oil and gas. And instead of that ban passing towards the end of the legislative session, the language was compromised, and a 3-year moratorium was put in that states there is this moratorium. However, the same law states that DEEP is mandated to write regulations, and they have to submit these regulations sometime between July 1st, that just recently passed, and July 1st of next summer. So we have that mandate going forward. State law requires them to write these regulations and submit them for review. The Legislative Review Committee, the Regulations Review Committee, is a 14-member panel of legislators. They do not have the authority to say, we don't like your regulations and we want a ban. They can say to DEEP, you know, we need a second draft, we want tweaks on this, we want possibly that changed, but they don't have the authority to say, nope, we decided we don't like it, we want a ban.
I chaired the Regulation Review Committee. And you're absolutely correct. But this ban, the legislature is asking Regulation Review to ban it, or are they giving it the discretion to the Environment Committee, to DEEP?
There's currently state law that says we have a moratorium in Connecticut for bringing in hydraulic fracturing waste and anything that's produced secondarily to that hydraulic fracturing process. DEEP is mandated to write regulations and submit them within a certain year time period, and we're a quarter of the way in.
Got it.
And then the Regulations Review Committee will take it up for review. So unless towns pass an ordinance themselves, or unless the state law gets changed, this moratorium is temporary. It doesn't necessarily end next July 1st. It ends when the review process is over and the regulations are finalized.
Right. I'm curious, have you been in touch with our health director, and why isn't she here?
I have not. I initially was approached by a member of, or a resident in Stratford who introduced me to the Conservation Commission, and they had a very similar presentation in a little bit more detail. I was trying to rush it for you guys, so I wasn't taking too much of your council time. From what I understand, the Conservation Commission was in favor. They were champions in local government, and going through other departments hasn't occurred. I know that the staff member who sits on the Conservation Commission, I'm forgetting her name, Christina Pateau, she did send an email that she had other obligations she had to be at tonight, so.
Did she testify at the Conservation Committee?
She was present when the presentation was given to the Conservation Commission here in town.
Did she offer an opinion?
I think she was staying neutral. You know, as a town employee, I don't think it's in her purview to make a recommendation without, you know, it's really up to the council to make a decision. You're the legislators.
Well, we depend on the opinions of our,
Yeah.
you know, staff. She being one of our staff, she's the conservation officer.
Yeah.
I won't belabor that. Moving on. Why hasn't the Bridgeport Common Council taken this up?
So far, there have been residents interested in having this passed in Bridgeport. They've collected several hundred petition signatures, but they haven't approached the Common Council. I know some residents that were involved in the petition signature gathering were concerned about the September 12th primaries and who would be sitting and who would be actually running. So I think they were kind of waiting for things to kind of settle out a little bit as far as the elections are concerned. I recently gave a presentation to the South Central COG, and that's what spurred Milford and some other towns forward. But other than that, it's been pretty much on a town-by-town basis, where either champions in government contact me and say, you know, can you come in and talk to our committee, or citizens have contacted me and said, you know, we want to build a grassroots effort. So, yeah, you're welcome.
Manos?
Hi. I'm noticing that the key, the legend,
Mm-hmm.
POWs approved to accept transported non-domestic wastewater. Is that Bridgeport?
Right. No.
Hazardous waste treatment facility.
The dark green diamonds are the 3 privately owned for-profit hazardous waste treatment facilities. There is one in Bridgeport. The same company owns another one in Meriden, and then a separate company owns one in Bristol.
Okay, so that was what you were talking about, those facilities.
So the dark green are those 3 facilities that could, once regulations are written, they can apply for permits if they want to start processing this waste.
Okay.
And then there's going to be so much effluent in, you know, constantly processing these, that it's not known if all that effluent can go into the sewage system of those 3 towns. And so depending on future regulations, DEEP might allow other publicly owned treatment works to accept treated effluent. And there's 12 of those in the state that accept transported non-domestic waste. So, you know, we're worried that regulations will also spread partially treated but still contaminated effluent to other locations.
So am I, New Haven, Greater New Haven's WPCA accepts those POTWs, correct?
New Haven has a facility that is a
And-
publicly owned treatment work that accepts transported non-domestic waste.
And if for some reason we, in the future, decided to regionalize with them, or we had regionalized with them, we would then be able to accept those wastes as well, correct? Because it's private, is it privately owned or no?
No, those are specific publicly owned treatment works that have a different type of permit.
Okay.
And individual town municipal-owned treatment works.
Okay,
So, like, my town also has its own treatment work in Glastonbury, but we accept domestic waste, so what's coming out of sewage systems.
Okay.
So, I'm assuming that I don't know what Stratford's permits are, but I'm assuming it's similar to Glastonbury because of the size of your town.
my other question was regarding the slide before this. You said Pennsylvania, but then you brought up New York.
Right.
And all that, so the purple is hydraulic fracturing, which is happening, right? And there's no waste facilities there?
No, in Pennsylvania, are where most of these horizontally, high volume horizontally drilled wells are. In New York State, they are fracturing wells, but they are only allowed to use up to 200,000 gallons. They can't use any more than that to fracture a well. So most of the New York wells that are being fractured are, or all of them really, are drilled vertically down, just like that very first slide you saw.
Okay.
But the difference is Pennsylvania is, and there is Marcellus shale in this lower tier across the southern tier of New York State. So when residents in New York saw what was happening in Pennsylvania with this high volume fracturing, individual towns started passing their own bans and moratorium before New York State passed the law that said no high volume fracturing in our state.
Because I remembered seeing a flag, which was by Rochester,
Yeah.
that there was a facility in New York,
Yeah.
correct? So is there a reason why there's this random facility?
These are facilities that are importing waste from Pennsylvania into the state of New York. And
Got it.
again, these are privately owned landfills that are getting permits from the state to import waste from Pennsylvania. And because of that, the county legislatures started passing their own bans specifically to the waste, that, well, if the state is allowing this waste to be imported, that's fine, but it's not going to come to our county.
Right.
And so 15 counties have passed these bans, and the two most recent that have passed have had this really comprehensive language that we're recommending.
So you can have a little flag, but you just don't necessarily accept fractured waste.
Well, the two flags that you saw in upstate New York aren't in any region here. So there were actually in Niagara County, way over by Lake Erie, there was waste that was being sent there, but then the county banned it, so it's no longer going there.
Got it.
Yeah, and now there's another facility that's practically on the shores of Lake Ontario that's accepting it.
It's currently accepting it.
Yeah, a solid waste facility.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Thanks.
you're welcome.
Anybody else?
No, but it's 7:45 and there's no quorum, so.
Just want to thank you for coming tonight. The Conservation Commission did not make a formal recommendation. I was absent last week. Shucks. We don't have a quorum. I know Stratford has a history of kind of burying a word, or, okay, its problems, and we'd like to join this momentum to avoid having those problems in the future. Thank you for coming tonight. I think you've touched a critical mass of us, and we have a good handout that Jen B. shared, and we'll take this up at our next meeting.
And I can forward these slides to you if you want to share them to members who weren't here, and if you want me to come back to answer questions from those members, I'd be happy to.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Oh, Mr.
Before you
Chase?
close, stalling for time in case someone does show up. I'm just curious, how much does New York or West Virginia get for storing this, taking this waste? Do you know?
Well, each state writes its own regulations on the oil and gas industry. The EPA really, and the federal government really has very little jurisdiction over the oil and gas industry. It's up to the states. And West Virginia was allowing waste to go to solid waste facilities, and then the leachate that drains down through those facilities started showing signs of increased radioactivity. So when the beneficial reuse was brought up, maybe we can take this solid waste and use it in different means rather than sending it all to solid waste facilities. The West Virginia legislature asked Marshall University and their engineering department to do a study on using it, and they came back and said, you don't want to use it in construction or as road base because of the radioactivity. Has a very high silt content, so you could have slippage in the future and then huge costs to rebuild or repave where it slipped.
But the question was, did West Virginia get money from the oil industry to take this material?
Well, they have a lot of drilling going on in West Virginia. The Marcellus Shale goes underneath the state of West Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah, so. And I don't know the exact figures for each state, but a lot of Pennsylvania's waste is shipped out to Ohio and injected into the ground in injection wells. And we can't do that in the state, in Connecticut, because we don't have the geology, and it's also illegal. We passed laws a long time ago saying we're not going to inject waste into the ground. But I think it was in 2013 or something, I saw a figure for Ohio. The state made about $1 million off of permit fees. So, any income that you could possibly make,
Won't offset.
it won't offset. I mean, you just have to look at what's happening with Greenwich right now. They've paid $5.6 million, and they haven't even finished their cleanup. And it's estimated they're going to have another $14 million before it's done. And there's areas that they're not even testing yet, because they don't want to know how big the problem is. So, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, possibly in the future, A phone call to the members might be helpful so that we're not stalling on some of these important issues.
And if that's-
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave's at work. I can't reach
What
Wally.
organization you represent?
Can't reach
Yes,
Stephanie.
Food and Water Watch, and I'm a volunteer.
Agendas, I mean, it's-
Food and Water Watch is a national organization. They also have offices overseas, and I'm a volunteer.
Yeah, let's call the public hearing.
Mr. Finance Director, breaking up, do you want to say anything, or would you prefer to wait when we have the forum? Sorry.
Yeah, no, gentlemen, we're all very sorry about that.